Hi everyone, welcome back to Science on Trial and Error. My name is Kasia Kuzmicz-Kowalska and I'm the host of this podcast. It's my great pleasure to welcome you back after the short break we had in October. The reason for the break was that I had a rather difficult time at work, which also affected my health, and I ended up falling a bit behind with all things podcast related. But we are back, and we are back with a lot of great stuff. I'm so grateful that you all keep coming back and that you share the podcast with your friends. I'm so amazed that we reach milestones which I wasn't expecting to reach, like how many of you download the episodes or message me afterwards. It's truly heartwarming and magical, and actually it is through this community effect that I got in touch with today's guest. But first, let me introduce her properly. Daisy Shearer comes from the United Kingdom, and she's a PhD candidate in Experimental Condensed Matter Physics at the University of Surrey. Her current research is focused on semiconductor spintronics and its use for quantum technology applications. Prior to her PhD, Daisy obtained an integrated master's degree in physics from the University of Surrey, and for her master's thesis, she worked in industry to develop semiconductor lasers for telecommunication. Daisy is very passionate about science communication and education. She is currently pursuing a graduate certificate in teaching and learning alongside her PhD. Daisy's blog and Instagram page, called Notes from the Physics Lab, are a scientific outreach resource with brilliant explanations of different concepts from physics field in a truly accessible way. But it's also an honest account of her PhD journey, her experiences of being a female autistic scientist, her passion for science, and her struggles with mental health. She's committed to raising awareness about mental health, equality, diversity, and inclusion in science, with focus on disabled and neurodivergent people. She wants to challenge public perception of autism and start discussions to gain more understanding, empathy, and support. Her project Neurodivergent in STEM is a platform for neurodivergent people who work in STEM fields, allowing them to share their stories and encouraging communication and accessibility in science. I'm very grateful that thanks to this podcast, I got a chance to meet Daisy and hear her story. I really appreciate her honesty and vulnerability. She's a lovely person with a big heart who really loves science and has fantastic skills in communicating it in an easy way, and who wants to make the scientific world a better place. If you don't follow Daisy yet, please do that. And now enjoy listening to our conversation. Please welcome Daisy Shearer. Hi Daisy, thank you for accepting the invitation to be the guest on my podcast. I'm very happy we will have a chance to talk about your work and your story.
Hi, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So where are you right now? Are you in Surrey?
I am in Surrey right now, yeah. I live in Guildford, so very wet day today here in England.
Oh, is it cold?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Autumn has come.
Here, still, we are having a lot of sun, I must say. So it's actually quite nice in Vienna. I mean, it's getting colder, but it's been extremely sunny this last week. So I'm still trying to enjoy it as long as I can. Normally, I start by asking people how they like to work in the lab and whether they can listen to the music or not. So I was wondering if you use music to help you focus, or is it something that actually doesn't help you at all during working?
Yeah, I usually do listen to music when I'm working in the lab or in the office. I like to listen to instrumental music. No lyrics, but yeah, I'm usually listening to music actually.
That's nice. Is it more classical music or like movie soundtracks?
A mixture actually. I'm a big fan of sort of Studio Ghibli soundtracks. That's like my go-to.
Nice.
But yeah, I like a little bit of classical music as well.
That's super nice. So I actually know you from Instagram, where you run your profile called Notes from the Physics Lab. And you also run another page that is called Neurodivergent in STEM. And it's been actually very nice getting to know you through your posts and through your blog as well. But I think it would be cool first to discuss maybe your current work, and then we can go to your other initiatives and other projects, because I think that you are doing a lot, so we can really go into more details then.
Yeah.
You are a PhD candidate in condensed matter physics at University of Surrey, right?
Yes, that's correct.
When did you start your PhD?
I started my PhD in 2018.
So it's like 3 years, right?
Yeah, I've done a 4 years, so I've got 1 year left, fingers crossed. I have had an extension because of the pandemic, a 6-month extension, but I am hoping to complete within the 4 years if I can.
I see. I would like to hear more about your work. It's actually the field of the quantum physics, and you're working on semiconductors, spintronics. And this sounds... okay, I know what a spin is. I know. I remember this from my chemistry class and also a bit of a physics during my bachelor's.
Yeah.
And I kind of know a bit about quantum physics because we had a guest who works on qubits. But I would really like you to maybe give us an overview that would be suitable for people who really don't know what this crazy word means.
Yeah, my work is in the subfield of semiconductor spintronics. And that essentially means that I work with a type of material called semiconductors, which is sort of between an insulator and a conductor. And the nice thing about semiconductors is we have a lot of tunability in engineering their properties. I've worked with semiconductors since my master's research when I was working on semiconductor lasers for telecommunications. So that was all about exploiting the quantum mechanical properties of semiconductors because they have a lot of quantum stuff going on, and using that to have these lasers switch on and off quicker. So essentially, the quicker you can switch a signal on and off, the faster you can send information down an optical fiber. So that's what my research for my master's was on. And then I wanted to carry on in semiconductors, which is how I ended up in spintronics. Spintronics basically means spin transport electronics. I specifically look at semiconductors, but some people look at other materials like metals, and it's all about understanding electron spin. So electron spin is the angular momentum of an electron, and this property, it's really difficult to kind of conceptualize. It's called spin because if we thought of it classically in terms of classical physics, it would be like a spinning ball of charge, but of course electrons aren't really little balls that fly around an atom. That's where all the quantum mechanics comes in. And yeah, my work is essentially understanding how the property of spin can be manipulated and studied within semiconductors and to make new technologies. So you mentioned qubits, and electron spin qubits are one type of qubit, but I'm also interested in quantum metrology applications. So that's all about the science of measurement. And so things like super precise magnetic field sensors. So yeah, that's a little overview.
So is your work more of a basic research, trying to understand the very basic phenomena, or is it more trying to really develop the technologies and kind of bridging the technology world and the basic science world?
Definitely bridging the gap. It's actually a really lovely mixture. So the study I'm just wrapping up now is what I would call a fundamental physics experiment. But the stuff that I'm sort of will be finishing towards the end of the year, that's more on the materials science and materials engineering side of things. I'm fabricating devices that I will then look at the properties in my experiment after that. So it's like a lovely mixture of things. And I guess I narrow down because I focus on one material called indium antimonide, which has super extreme properties which make it really interesting, but it's a bit of a pain to work with at times. So not many people have studied it. So it's kind of quite a new area to look into, which is exciting.
Yeah, exactly. This is very exciting to work on something that is so not well known, right? But on the other hand, it brings a lot of challenges. You mentioned working with a difficult material. I guess you have to develop a lot of things entirely for the first time by yourself. How has it been working on such topic? Like, do you get a lot of support from your supervisor? Are you free to explore different avenues? how does this kind of work work?
So my supervisor has been working with indium timonide since his PhD. So he's really knowledgeable about the subject. And we also have a group that we work in at the University of Cardiff. Mm-hmm. They also have a small group that have quite a few PhDs working on this material as well. And within the department at Surrey, I work with a lot of the electrical engineers and materials engineers. Although they don't specifically have experience with the material I work with, they have experience the apparatus that I work with. I use a piece of equipment called a focused ion beam to do a lot of my fabrication. It basically just shoots charged atoms at a surface, and it can either dig holes in things or it can build up material. It's probably my favorite piece of equipment that I work with, and my colleagues have been, absolutely fab at training me on it. And whenever something goes wrong, I can be like, hey, this weird thing is happening. Is that normal? And they can be like, well, I've heard of it happening in gallium arsenide. So yeah, a lot of collaboration goes on, even though I'm the only PhD in my department working on this specific material.
That's very good. I mean, that's exciting that you have support and space to really develop as a scientist and to become very independent. Yeah, you mentioned engineers helping you out, but I guess you also do a lot of engineering yourself. Was it something that you had training before during your master's, or was it something that you really started to do and learn during your PhD?
During my PhD, when I was doing my master's, I wanted to be allowed to go into their clean room and be making the devices and then testing them and then, doing the whole process. But because of health and safety, and my internship was 9 months, so essentially we didn't get a chance to do that. So I was keen to get in there with the fabrication during my PhD. And it's been a great skill. Like, I'd never used a scanning electron microscope before my PhD, and now I must have taken hundreds and hundreds of images with it. Those sort of skills that I've really been able to develop, which has been fab.
That's amazing. Coming back to the topic of your work, the semiconductors. So if I understood correctly, they have been studied, but a lot about them is not known. And this application for quantum physics, is it something that is being more and more established? Because the usual use for them is actually not in this field, right?
So semiconductors have been sort of a core of condensed matter physics for many years. The most common semiconductor is silicon. And of course, all of our electronics are pretty much made up of silicons. A lot of our tech infrastructure is already based on semiconductor materials, and there's been a lot of research into the electronic side of things. It's this spin aspect that's the newer thing. And that's kind of what's really exciting, is taking this type of material that's relatively well known and then pushing the boundaries into a sort of new paradigm. Okay, the interesting thing about using spin as well as like electron charge is that we can potentially encode a lot more data and information within a single electron because of the quantum nature of spin. So it could really push the boundaries, especially when we're looking at things like quantum computing.
How easy it is to manipulate the spin during your research? I don't know if you get what I mean.
I think I do, yeah. The bottom line is it is incredibly difficult to control spin because it's a sort of quantum mechanical property. Quantum decoherence comes into things very quickly. So I have to conduct my experiments at very low temperatures, usually around 4 Kelvin, because temperature can affect the system and it just washes out any quantum effects that you can see. And also, there's a property called quantum lifetime. And for most materials, this is very, very short. So I haven't actually got to the stage yet where I've been able to control electron spin, but I have developed methods for sort of observing electron spin.
So you can record it and then study how it behaves depending on the fabrication of your design?
Yeah, and one thing that I'm sort of in the middle of looking at is a nanostructure called a quantum point contact. It's basically this really tiny constriction that we make. And when you pass an electron through it, theoretically, and there have been a few experimental studies as well, you can do what's called spin polarization. It should deflect electrons of one kind of spin in one direction and the other kind of spin in the other direction. In theory, but nobody's demonstrated it with what we call 100% fidelity yet. And that is something that I was hoping to do for my PhD, but I think that might have to be passed on to the next student now, because I've spent a lot of time sort of refining my fabrication techniques. The scope of things has had to be taken down a notch, mostly because of disruption from the pandemic and things. But it's still really exciting to lay the groundwork for that kind of work.
Of course. I mean, it's very cutting edge work, and it takes a lot of time to develop these technologies. And I think you moved forward a lot. So I think that's super cool. And also we have a limited time to do our PhD. So of course we would like to do so much, but it has to be feasible within the time frame that we are given for the project.
Yeah. And there's so many little side routes that I could take and that I would love to take, but you just have to be pragmatic about it and say, okay, I need to finish this at some point.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So I was wondering, because you have the background put in on your picture right now, what is it? Is it your room where you design something? What am I seeing?
I'll move out of the way a bit, you can see. So this is a big magnet. A lot of my measurements are done using an external magnetic field because that interacts with the electron spin. This is actually a magnet in the Netherlands that we had some experimental time on in the beginning of 2020. It's actually in the floor, the magnet, and there's this big stick that you put your tiny chip in with your device on, and it goes all the way down into the floor, into this magnet, and it's cooled down with liquid nitrogen and helium to very low temperatures. I love this picture because it has all of these cool sample sticks that kind of look like lightsabers in the background. Not great for a podcast, but...
No, I will take a picture and then people can see.
Excellent.
But I think it's kind of cool that you have this as a background and people can really see how your work looks like. Because, spin sounds very like something that we can try to imagine, but we cannot really see in the way to kind of understand very easily. And then that's the thing, the scale of your equipment is very big, but then your chip is actually very tiny, right? It's
exactly.
What, nano scale?
Yeah, the device on the chip would be nanoscale. The chip itself is probably about 5 millimeters, and that's what we connect. We connect teeny tiny wires, which is another incredibly fiddly task that I have to do, onto these sort of nanoscale devices. It's, part of the job.
Do you like this part of the job? Do you like the fabrication?
Yeah, I really enjoy it. My favorite parts are fabrication and doing the actual measurements. Although, I like a bit of writing and analysis as well. I'm a scientist.
I really enjoy the idea of bridging the basic science to the technology. And I really feel like it's an important thing that also shows you more how applicable your work is and gives you a bit of perspective. Yeah, I was wondering how important it was for you when you were looking for your project to have something that would translate into something more applicable? Or was it more about the basic science aspect that drove you to this place?
A bit of both, because my master's sort of experience was in an industry lab. I knew that I was quite interested in applications. So the programs that I applied for were all very experimental, but the program that I'm in at the moment, I think, is sort of the most applicable to future technologies. So yeah, it was definitely one of the big factors that I wanted to not just be doing fundamental physics, but also be looking towards the engineering side as well.
In your master's, you mentioned you worked with semiconductors as well. And you worked on also applications in technology. I guess you didn't have to set up so many experiments. Like you were just working more on applicable side, right?
Yeah, it was that there was a much sort of stronger basis there already for my master's. So embarking on a PhD was much more going out into the unknown, which is part of why it's exciting, but also where it's difficult.
Yeah, I agree. And you did it also at the University of Surrey, or was it?
Yes,
it was, right?
I did my undergrad at Surrey as well. It was the 4-year MPhys, so sort of a BSc and MSc
like
kind
integrated.
of smushed together, integrated type thing. I did apply to other places, but this project really got me hooked. So
yeah. That's good. I mean, the most important part of the PhD, I think, is to really connect with your project, because it requires so much work and effort, and then you have to commit for a long time. So it's important to feel like this is your thing. So was it always a plan to end up in quantum physics or in condensed matter physics, or were you interested in other things at the beginning of your master's?
Yeah, I guess I've been quite interested in quantum physics since I was a teenager, but I always felt I wasn't smart enough to do it, unfortunately. But it's a quite complicated subject, and I was always a bit worried I wouldn't be able to do it. But when I went to do my degree, I sort of did a kind of scattergun approach and tried modules, because we had optional modules as well as compulsory ones. So I was like, I'm going to try a bit of this, I'm going to try a bit of that, I'm going to see what I like. And the condensed matter physics and the quantum physics was what I was most engaged with. So that's what I went with. And then in my placement, a lot of my colleagues were encouraging me. They were seeing how much I was enjoying the research aspect and saying, "Oh, Daisy, you should do a PhD if you want to carry on in sort of quantum technology research." So their encouragement really helped me a lot, and that's sort of the main reason why I did push on with the PhD, because I'm not sure that without that encouragement, I think I would have not had the confidence to apply. So
was this issue about feeling not confident enough a problem that is very common, especially in male-dominated fields as is physics, either very openly or very hidden stereotypes or like gender bias? Was this what was affecting you a lot?
Yeah, I think the gender stereotyping was definitely one aspect of it, and not having that many role models who I could relate to in physics, I guess, in general, especially in sort of this more technology side of physics and condensed matter. You do see a lot, well, not a lot of astrophysicists, but I feel like there are more astrophysics female role models perhaps than in my field. Yeah, I think that was a big factor, and just general imposter syndrome that I think everybody in academia, whatever your gender.
Of course, yeah, we all have been there. We all felt like we are somehow not good enough. But I'm glad you found people who encouraged you to do this, and I actually think this is very, very cool that your decision, it was really driven also by other people realizing how good you are at what you do, and just kind of giving you a bit more boost to the confidence. And this sounds like you had a really nice group of people around you to really help you through this. I mean, it's a very difficult decision to do the PhD. It can be done quickly, but then considering how long it takes and how much effort and sacrifice it really does take over the years, it's good that you had support when you were making this decision.
Yeah, for sure.
How is your family reacting to you wanting to do a PhD? Is your family also related to academia? Are they also in science, or are they completely out in different fields?
So both of my parents are vets, and my dad actually has a PhD in veterinary pathology. So he's published a couple of papers and a textbook, but he left academia very early on in his career. So yeah, it was always sort of very much in the family, and my sibling has now just started their PhD.
Aww.
So my parents are always very encouraging of us wanting to pursue science. I'm thrilled that I wanted to become a physicist. They're really engaged with what I do, even though they're more on the biology and medicine side of things. Especially my dad, he really loves physics. So I think he loves that I'm a physicist and everything, which is, it makes such a difference having the support from my family, because I know that, they're on my team and they're always proud of whatever I do. We're really lucky in that respect, and not being sort of first generation at all as well. It makes a big difference. Like my dad was saying to me when I started my PhD, oh, it's a long haul and it's a marathon, not a sprint. And he was giving me all these tips and all those things.
This is super important. I'm actually a first gen, and everybody was like, yeah, you have to get higher degree, then your life will be easier. So there was this kind of connection of, you're going to do better than us because you're going to have higher education. but no one really knew how difficult this life also is, how difficult it's also to be successful. It's not like you get a degree and this guarantees that you're gonna have a very easy life. And I feel like sometimes these two visions of how my life looks like and how it actually is are crushing, because they are just not seeing it the way that I see it and I live it. So having this, I guess it was a bit more honest, but then you were a bit better prepared, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I remember sort of reading a lot around it from people's blogs and on social media. And I think the fact that we have these ways of sharing experiences is really powerful, especially for first-gen people like you who don't have that sort of personal family connection. It definitely, I think, prepared me for what was ahead.
So were you actually thinking about becoming a vet, or was it never interesting for you?
No, it was never on the cards. So I absolutely adore animals, and that's probably the main reason I don't want to be a vet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get. You don't want to see too much,
No, I'm pretty squeamish, and I've seen enough pictures of diseased animals in my life from my parents that I was like, I don't think that's for me.
Yeah, I get your point. I get your point. We discussed that you started liking physics already early on, and then you went on to study it. Was there any particular reason that you got interested in physics? Was this a high school teacher? Did you start reading some books? Was it actually your parents who showed you a bit of this world? How did it actually start, like very early on, if we can go back to this moment?
So I think my parents definitely had a big impact on my love of science. I remember sort of at the beginning of high school, my dad would always help me with science projects and stuff, and we would go really in-depth things. I gave a presentation about animal cells, I think, in my first few years of high school. And I remember my science teacher being like, I think this is too high level. So that was always really encouraged. But I love creative subjects as well, like music and art as well, were big passions of mine. So balancing that creative side and the scientific side, I was kind of torn on what I wanted to do. But I think by the time I was 15 or 16, I decided science was definitely where I wanted to go for my career. And actually research is perfect, because I think you have to be creative to be a researcher. That's something that people don't realize as much. Certainly those sort of 15, 16 years, I really loved chemistry and physics in particular. And I had a chemistry class, I remember, where we were learning about electron shells in the atom, and that's when spin came up. And I wanted to learn more from my teacher, and she said, oh, you should go and talk to the physics department. They'll be able to tell you more about electron spin. I went and chatted to them, and my teacher recommended me a book about quantum mechanics that was sort of a popular science book. So it was at a level that I could read. And that was kind of my entry into quantum physics and sort of just being really passionate about it. I'd always been pegged as kind of the physics girl throughout high school, because I went to an all-girls school and not that many people enjoyed physics at my school. So I kind of stood out because I enjoyed it and I really excelled at it. So I guess I just kind of embraced that. And I think my love of physics just comes down to the fact that it's so fundamental, and you use mathematics to explain the world, and then physics kind of underpins chemistry, and that lets us look at sort of larger systems. And I don't know, I feel like it all interlinks. I find that really fascinating that, you go down into the details and you'll eventually get to physics.
Yeah, that's true. It really allows you to understand the very, very tiny basics of everything around, really. I mean, you need maths as a tool to translate it and explain it and measure it, but physics is really more about the understanding, the very basics. I agree.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Okay, now you are, as you said, going into your last year, trying to wrap things up, I guess, working on the dissertation and the papers at some point within this time. What are your further plans? What do you want to do?
I've been thinking about this a lot recently, actually. I would love to potentially work at a national lab. That's my sort of top choice, sort of a bridge between academia and industry. But longer term, I think eventually going out into industry. But I'm passionate about teaching in higher education as well. So I want to keep my university ties to maybe do some guest lecturing and things like that, and continue with my science communication work, because I think that's really important to me as a scientist, communicating with the general public as well as my academic peers. I think not enough of us do it.
You mentioned being passionate about teaching. You're actually doing another degree right now in teaching, right?
Yeah, so I'm doing a graduate certificate in teaching and learning. It's very part-time over 18 months. I'm halfway through it now, and it's really great. It's exploring the theoretical side of teaching and then applying that into practice. And it gets me out of my department. I get to talk to postgraduate researchers and teaching fellows from other areas like psychology and languages, and I think it's really good for me to talk to people who have a really different perspective on teaching. We're quite set in our ways, and we can experiment a bit. That's what physics is about.
That's true. And also trying to explain physics to someone who is not a scientist of natural sciences, or it's much harder, right? You have to find the language. That's what you also do in your science communication. But I think it takes practice, and the more practice you get, the better you'll be.
I'm really interested actually in applying teaching in science communication as well. I think so many of the concepts overlap there. My interest is really driven by my experience in undergrad and sort of feeling that a lot of my professors kind of forgot what it was like to be a student, and they weren't necessarily making things accessible to us, and wanting to make sure that, if I was ever in that situation, I'd be able to have lots of ways of explaining things and exploring stuff with students so they didn't feel like blinded with science, as it were, which I think can sometimes be the case, especially with that sort of lecture and blackboard type style of teaching.
It can be discouraging when you don't get the concept, because then you start thinking, okay, am I the only one who doesn't get it? And then also, of course, it depends on the professor, but some professors are not very encouraging when it comes to asking any type of question. So then you're like, should I ask about it, or am I just not getting it and everyone is getting it? And then imposter syndrome kicks in. And, some PhD programs, they require that you do some teaching and that you gain experience in this, but some don't. And then we end up in a situation where, it can really change somebody's perspective on your field depending how you teach. It can show them how amazing your field is, or it can just completely discourage them towards it, and they can just change their entire plans. And I think we tend to forget about this when we teach. I'm very impressed that you're doing this, and I think this will just make your further career, regardless where you end up, better and more approachable to people around you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. To put that sort of into practice, I do laboratory demonstrating. That's kind of the teaching format that I'm in, teaching assistant in labs, and, doing justice by my students and helping them learn and helping them have that confidence. If I can do something for my students like my colleagues did for me in my placement by believing me, I worry that we lose so many brilliant minds just from a bad teacher. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant before. There are so many people who have the mind, but then there are so many things in academia that can discourage them. Like, it can be teaching, it can be a toxic environment, it can be gender bias, it can be a lot of different things, but we need to try to make it better, because times when we were assuming that people who survive this hard school of academia will be the best is really over. This is not the way to go about this. It's not healthy, and I think we don't really need this anymore. But of
totally
course,
agree.
It's quite perpetuated in universities and in general in science, because these people who survived it, some of them at least, think that if they teach their students like this, then they will also be successful, which, it can break people, which is a stupid thing.
Yeah, totally.
Coming back to your initiatives, I think we can go into more details of this. I mentioned before that you have the Instagram page and the blog where you are sharing more of your life as a PhD student and also science and your science communication ideas. I really had a look through some of your articles, and I've seen you on Instagram already a while back, and I've also seen your short talk about your project, which was really entertaining. And I think it's really cool that you do this. I think it's really good for people out there to see how the life of a PhD student is, and also what kind of work you're doing, and trying to explain it in an easy way, I guess, gives you some sort of an outlet. But I was wondering, how did this start? Like, what was the main drive at the beginning to do this?
Yeah, when I started my PhD, a lot of my friends and family were kind of, oh, what do you actually get up to? Like, it's one thing kind of trying to explain it over the telephone or whatever. But I decided I'd just start posting little bits and bobs on my Instagram and just be like, oh, well, you can see some pictures of me actually in a lab. And before I knew it, it had sort of picked up steam, and I'd kind of discovered the science communication community and the PhD community on Instagram. And it sort of grew from there. And I share stuff that I'm up to. Obviously, I can't share too many details on my specifics of my work until it's published, but I try to explore a lot of the theory in an accessible way, and that's helped me so much, because if I can explain it to someone who's not in my field and they understand it, that means I probably understand it fairly well. Sometimes I don't do it. Sometimes I get extra questions like, I didn't quite understand that, but that's just so good of a learning experience in terms of me. I can get better at making sure I'm pitching at the right level and all of these things. And I love how you can have discussions with people and you can take it into different directions because of commenting and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess as well as that, I also share some more general PhD stuff. Like, I'm not scared of talking about my mental health and about being autistic and things like that. I think that it's sort of a nice outlet to talk about both the physics side of things and the realities of academia, I guess, both the positives and negatives, because I do think there's so many wonderful things about academia, like collaboration and sharing knowledge and all these things. So that's where it came from, really, was just trying to help some people I know see what I was getting up to.
I actually think that it's very admirable that you are being so honest and decide to be so vulnerable as well with people, because Instagram has a bit of a mixed situation. We have a very idealized accounts, which make us feel sometimes really bad about ourselves, because we are nowhere close to this. Like, I don't wear makeup every time to the lab, and I don't look so great when I'm pipetting. And then on the other hand, there are these accounts that I really appreciate that are very raw and very honest. I think it takes courage to open up. I guess your experiences must have been quite nice in a way that people react, otherwise you would probably not be doing it. But I was wondering, in this whole process of sharing also your personal details, discussing your mental health, discussing how, you being autistic affects your everyday work. Yeah, were you worried, and did you ever get negative comments about that, or were people actually open and understanding?
Yeah, I guess I was worried, especially disclosing my autism diagnosis. I think I've first talked about my autism on Autism Awareness Day, which was fairly supportive. There's always, on those kinds of posts where I talk about mental health and autism and disability, there's always the odd person who says something negative or something kind of ignorant, if that makes sense. But overwhelmingly, there's so many positives that, it's hard to manage sometimes those negative comments, but I do try to focus on all the people who are relating to what I'm saying. I get a lot of private messages from people talking about how they can really relate, or maybe their child has autism and that's really helped them kind of see that it won't necessarily hold them back in things. But yeah, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it really, affects me and triggers off my depression. But I do think that it does a lot of good. There is quite a large community of people, especially talking about mental health in academia now. And I think that the solidarity in that really encourages me, because being part of that community and adding my voice into the voices of many, I think it feels worthwhile. I've met a lot of wonderful people. I like to discuss the hard topics sometimes because I don't think we're going to change things if we don't. If we just ignore stuff, it's just going to stay the same, and people are still going to be, in this toxic environment, which is not great.
I definitely agree. I think it's a very important mission, and you and other people who do this, I think it changes the perception of people also on many things, on having mental problems and just being in academia, on being autistic and doing science and being successful scientists. Also, one of the reasons why I started this podcast was actually this, to create a platform that is honest about the good things and the bad things, and just to give other people a way to see that there's no one right path. We all have very different stories, and we all go through some things which in the end end up being very similar, so that actually we can relate to many things. And when we feel alone, there's a lot of people that go through this. I think it's an important mission, and I'm glad you're doing this. And I'm also glad that you're doing this other account that we mentioned at the beginning, which is called Neurodivergent in STEM. This is something that you are running kind of in a similar idea as this podcast, in a way that you share the stories of people. And I guess you also managed to meet a lot of people through that and create a community. I guess you wanted to start it to create some space for people to share.
Yeah.
Has this surprised you, how this developed, and what were the good things that came to you from that, from creating this account?
Well, first of all, I think exactly what you're saying, that you have this podcast of making space. I'm totally there with it. And I think it's amazing that you've created a space as well. Yeah, the idea was essentially trying to create more of a community. And I was seeing so much positive sort of feedback from me sharing my own personal experiences. And I'm aware that I'm just one person and I have my own experience, but there's so many other people within the neurodivergent community that, I couldn't possibly tell their stories. So I wanted them to tell their own stories and create this space where people can come and they can submit a story. It's like a little form that they fill out, and then we put it on our website, which is neurodivergentinstem.com, and put it on Instagram and Twitter as well. And we also have a Facebook and a LinkedIn group for people to join if they want to as well. Yeah, it's been really lovely. I get so inspired every time somebody submits a contribution, reading about where they've come from, what they've achieved, the challenges that they've pushed through.
Definitely.
I just get so inspired by it. And when I started it, I felt that I was sort of, obviously with my own personal account, it's all about me. And I was a little bit like, I'm so tired of me. I really wanted to focus on the community and sharing other people's stories. It was really driven by that, wanting to show the diversity within the neurodivergent community within the STEM fields. And we've had so many great people from physics like me to biology, chemists, from all around the world as well. And I just hope that it keeps growing and we keep adding more stories, and that it becomes a resource that people can use to feel less alone, like you were talking about. And
to connect with other people. This is really the power of the social media that I like and I really enjoy. The fact that we can meet someone across the world and just having the similar experience and feeling inspired. I feel so motivated when I read these stories as well. Of course, I cannot relate in many ways, but it just gives you a bit of perspective that is not just your own, and it really shows you also what's worth fighting for, because as you said, if we don't share and we don't speak up about these things, nothing will change. And I think the important thing for us, just being in academia, is to have a certain position, or to have a certain voice against or toward things that have to change. And this is something that I try to do in this podcast, in this part that I call Room for Improvement. And I find it very inspiring hearing what my guests think is important to change and important to them, and that is not working very well. So I was wondering what you would put on the map, what you think is still lacking.
Well, the main thing is certainly the sort of equality and diversity aspect of things. I wouldn't want to put one thing prioritized above the others. There's so many fabulous initiatives that have been coming up in recent years. All aspects of EDI, from LGBTQ, diversity like me, disability, ethnicity, all of these things. And I think that we're starting to realize sort of the systemic barriers that have been in place for marginalized people. And I'd love to see more understanding and empathy and more things in place to support those who are at a disadvantage compared with others, and linked in with that mental health support. If there's one thing that unites marginalised groups, it's probably that we're more likely to suffer from mental health conditions. Not that people who aren't marginalised can't be, but I do think that there's a high prevalence of mental health conditions like anxiety and depression in the academic community. And the only way we're going to help combat that is to acknowledge it, talk about it, and try and put some things in place that make the environment and the culture less toxic. Things like chronic stress that we all suffer, and stuff like pressure to publish. And I'd love to see a future where work-life balance was kind of at the top of everyone's list of priorities, and that we were putting stuff in place that didn't leave people behind.
To not stigmatize. Yeah, I definitely agree. This is something that comes up a lot, both accessibility of academia and of research, which is very lacking. And then the mental health aspects, I think there's definitely more discussion, but I would say it is still very, very long road ahead of us. And there is always this thing about you want to be open about it, but there's a lot of discussion how you can damage your job prospects or your work situation when you speak about it, which I think is also very damaging to the culture, very toxic. As long as people feel afraid to say openly that they are struggling with depression or they need to take sick leave just because they cannot deal, they are in burnout, it has to change. And I think this is something that is very tricky. At least for me, I struggle with a chronic disease that is relatively recently diagnosed. Like during my PhD, I was diagnosed. And I'm encountering very different positions of people towards me. It's either very understanding and trying to be accommodating, or actually I'm being told to not speak about it, to not share because I can lose job opportunities. And I guess, I can only assume, but in your case, this is something that you also must have thought about, or at least, discussed with people. Yeah. How open can you be about these things, and how to deal with the environment reactions to you being honest about you?
Yeah, I always worry about this, that I'm damaging my job prospects potentially by my openness. So yeah, I can relate certainly to that. And I've had people talk to me about that, strangers, which is always odd. Like, it's not relevant to you what I talk about.
Why do you care?
But at the end of the day, I think I want to work for somebody who is happy with openness and will be accommodating and provide reasonable adjustments that are needed. And hopefully there are enough available opportunities that won't sort of damage my long-term job prospects. I think that I'm open to being flexible with where I end up, and really high on the list of stuff that I care about in terms of an employer is their sort of diversity and inclusion opinions. And I think that's all wrapped up in that. But yeah, obviously I'm in a privileged position because I have some fairly sought after skills in quite a up and coming industry. And I appreciate that other people, especially multiply marginalized people, aren't in that same position. But that's even more reason for me to speak up, because I feel relatively comfortable enough doing so. And I've kind of can't really step back now because I've been so open about it and it's out there on the internet. I don't worry about it so much these days. And it's actually brought me a lot of opportunities. So.
Yeah, in a long-term scenario, you want to be comfortable at your workplace and you don't want to feel the need of constantly pretending. And I think the culture is changing, so I'm hoping these things will become less and less prevalent. Negative comments when you admit to having mental health problems, but the more we speak about it, the more people will change their mind, and also people will feel less alone when they actually don't have the courage yet to say anything.
I always go back to, I do my advocacy work for those people who message me and saying, I can't talk openly about my diagnosis or whatever, but seeing you talking about it just sort of gives me hope and things along those lines. I'm always trying to sort of pave the way for people coming up behind me. And locally at my university as well, I've been working a lot with our EDI team to try and put provisions in for neurodivergent students and things like that. So it always comes down to like, well, I'm making a difference to some people, and that's amazing.
Already big. Yeah, that's already so big. So how about we to this last a bit more relaxed part of the interview, which usually covers a bit of a cool science. Yeah, I like to ask my guests about either the cool science of someone else's that you find really interesting, or about cool science that you would like to do if your resources were unlimited. Ooh. So we can cover both. I think we have enough time. Is there something that you would like to share so that people can also follow up?
Yeah, so research of other people, I'm constantly inspired by other people's research, to be honest. One thing that I think is really cool is the National Physical Laboratory do a lot of work on atomic clocks. Okay. And I think atomic clocks are really awesome. It's all about using quantum stuff to do time stuff. Yeah, definitely look into that if you enjoy metrology type things. And it's all to do with precision timekeeping and things like that, which can be useful for stuff like satellites and GPS. And in terms of my own, if I had unlimited resources, I would definitely want to look into still semiconductor spintronics probably, but also look into the kind of photonics and optoelectronics side of things. So going back to my lasers past, I guess. And I'd love to do work on fabricating different types of qubits for quantum computing. I think that would just be awesome. Something I'm really interested in is an effect called proximity-induced superconductivity, which is a mouthful. But it's something that I would extend my PhD to do that if I could, but there won't be the time. So it's all about putting a superconductor in close contact with a semiconductor, and then you can induce superconductivity within that and do all sorts of crazy things that I don't have time to go into.
You should check out one of our podcast episodes, because we had a guest who talks on superconducting qubits. So that's very cool. I will send you a link.
Please do. I'll have to get in touch.
Yeah, definitely. It's really cool when you can find a way to bridge your work with some other work that is interesting, right? And try to find new applications and to go a step further. But I guess, yeah, having unlimited resources would really help. In this field is a lot of risk taking, and a lot of things might not play out because it's so cutting edge. It really requires a lot of investments that may not always pay back as good as you'd like.
And getting grants is quite challenging.
Yeah, exactly. Getting money to do this kind of high-risk projects is always tricky. I agree. Yeah. The last question. So I usually like to ask my guests about their scientific idols or the people that are inspiration to them. And if you could have dinner or coffee with someone who either inspired you a lot or you just like to meet this person, either a person that is still alive or no longer alive, who would that be?
It would definitely be Emmy Northup, a mathematician / theoretical physicist, and she is completely awesome. I wrote about her in my personal statement for going to university.
Interesting.
And I've read so many books about her. Just such an incredible figure, especially for women in mathematics and physical sciences. Like, she broke so many glass ceilings, it's mad. And an incredible mind. She did a lot of work on supersymmetry and things, and I just would want to pick her brains. Yeah, just if you haven't heard of her, definitely look her up and find out more.
Would you like to talk to her about her work or your work? Like, would you like to tell her about where we are now and just see what she'd think? Probably both, right?
Yeah, definitely both. Yeah, I'd like to hear her take on quantum computing, actually. I think that would be really fascinating. Really super cool. But also, I would just be like, please explain that all of this stuff, amazing stuff that you've done, because sometimes it goes a little bit over my head.
Just meeting someone who has been a role model, it would have been super cool, right? I definitely
definitely
agree. All right. Thank you for sharing all of this. I am extremely happy that I had a chance to meet you. I feel like starting this podcast has given me a chance to interact with so many people that I wouldn't have a chance to interact with. And I'm glad we can share your research and also your story and your initiatives with people out there. Make sure to check out Daisy's blog and also her sites and reach out to her also. I'm sure she's gonna love it. Thank you, Daisy.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. It was lovely to meet you and chat with you and everything.
Bye.
Bye.